So this brings me to another thing, which I guess is part of like what we're talking to is the self-awareness thing. I mean, how do you know when you're being too soft and too lenient? I'm always afraid to be too much of a hard ass, but sometimes I feel like I'm being too soft.
Right.
And then there are those people that think that they're treating their employees, like kings, and they're actually the biggest hard asses to work for in
Right.
the world.
Right.
So how do you know where you stand?
Well, to start with, are you being too soft? The first reality check is, are things just running amok? Are people disrespecting you? Is it more like a playground than a place of business? Are people taking advantage of you? Are they not keeping their word? Are they breaking agreements? Are they cheating in any way? And when I say cheating, they're not doing their work. They're kind of kicked back, and they kind of assume you're not going to do much about it. So that's to the extreme.
Right.
But again, if you're a good person, you can say, here's what I want, here are my expectations, and I also always want to know that I'm being assertive when I talk to you as opposed to aggressive. And that's something that I always talk to my clients about, which is there's three places on a spectrum you could be. One end of this spectrum is when you say too soft, am I giving myself up? Am I being a doormat? The other extreme is being aggressive, where you're just going after what you want, but you don't give that person the sense that there's a human being there and that you are taking their feelings into account as well as yours. That's what being assertive is. You're very clear that you have a right to say what you want, to have the expectations you do, but you always treat the other person like a human being, and you convey that at all times.
Then there's the other end of the spectrum where people are aggressive, and my sense is that the self-awareness is probably not as prevalent in those instances. We've all known the person who's like this complete workaholic, and they're workaholics because they don't trust any of their employees.
Right.
Right. I can't be gone for a minute, or they'll start stealing from me, or everybody, cats away the mice play kind of thing.
Well,
right?
It's so interesting when you say that. My first thought is, how on earth could you possibly run a business if that's your belief?
Well, you're always there. That's what some people do.
Right. Well, then what are you doing with those employees? And if that's the case, you still can look towards yourself, which is, why are you hiring people that you don't trust? And if this is a habitual belief or habit, then you do have to look to yourself. What the heck is going on with you? And that also gets back to what I would think as a therapist, a family issue from your childhood. There's some wound there. Who ripped you off? Who couldn't you trust? What's that about for you?
Right. Yeah. If you consistently feel like the people around you can't trust, like you say, either why did you hire them if you can't trust them?
That's right.
Or is nobody trustworthy? Then there's something. People are generally, I think, more trustworthy than not trustworthy.
Absolutely. So it still gets back to you. But you said something very important. Often those are the people that are not willing to self-reflect.
Right.
But you never know. You might get through to them.
Well, maybe they're watching the show,
Exactly.
And if it's you, if we're talking about you, then please, listen. Because I see it getting in the way of people's relationships. Because I see it getting in the way of people building their business. Because they can't do it all themselves, or they burn themselves out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would be surprised if somebody who believes they can't trust anybody to work for them, and all their employees are rotten and they're going to be crooks if they don't keep their eyes on them, that must be going on in other areas of their life as well.
So it's a small operation. Let's say a small company, we're just working with a few people.
Yes.
Our program is focusing on people with up to 10 employees, but I'd say probably most have fewer. So it's a very small, you're working very closely together, and somebody does something and they really need to be reprimanded. How does one do this in a way that preserves goodwill in the,
That's
in,
right.
in the company?
Where they can be assertive but not aggressive, where they don't annihilate who the person is. It's very similar to kids. It's what they did, not who they are. And that is so important. So you're not attacking them personally. Sure, it's what they did. So and even I think if you start with reprimand, you're also setting yourself up.
Yeah, well, that's that all the
feeling.
management books
Yeah.
have, right?
Yeah, well, that's a problem.
Praise and reprimand, right?
Yeah, but praise and
the carrot
reprimand.
and the stick.
Yeah. Well, again, I think it's important to say to come from a place of curiosity.
Okay.
And again, it works for other relationships as well, which is wanting to understand what happened.
Okay.
And that's what so many people want,
Right.
regardless of the relationship. They want understanding as opposed to, I'm going to reprimand you now for what you've done wrong. The other thing to keep in mind is there's been so much research on successful companies, small ones and big ones, and they've found that the successful companies are the ones that have a rich culture of appreciation. And that's money in the bank when it comes to personal relationships as well. And, bosses and managers may just assume that all they need is a salary and bonuses. And sure, we all want to be paid really well, but it's astonishing the kind of loyalty and hard work that bosses and managers get because they are always showing their appreciation. And I've even thought of companies that I've worked for where you can just work like crazy. I mean, I think of TV production companies, they never say anything. And I think of one production company I worked with, a very big one, very successful one. No matter what kind of success they had, there was an email that would go out to everybody saying, this success happened because of you, because of your good work. And it was constant. And to this day, it really stands out. And I would do anything for them. Wow. It wasn't necessarily the format that was my favorite, but boy, and they had integrity. And here's what's very interesting. It's one of the most successful shows on TV, and it still is.
Yeah, and then you do see the opposite, where people, my wife works as an employer for large companies, and it's amazing how many times she is doing her best to do something and working really hard, and through some misunderstanding, somebody comes out of the blue and just rips her, and just demoralizes her. And I keep thinking, well, so then, she was working really hard. Now she feels like terrible about going into work. She's depressed. Right. She's slower. I can tell she's slower.
Sure, and she's not doing it intentionally. I mean, that's a beautiful example. So if, let's say, that manager or that boss came into my office because they were saying, gosh, people just aren't working, I would say, when is the last time you caught that employee or another one, your wife, doing something right? Oh, well, they do lots of right things. Do they know that? It's like a deposit in the bank account. So you want to constantly make those deposits of positive, affirming statements, really authentic, so that the time comes where, wow, your employee's really messed up. You've created this culture of goodwill. So it's a lot easier. Plus, that person wants to make you happy and they want to do well. And even if an employee wants to do well, if they dread going in, if their whole system, their physiology is so escalated before they go in because they're anxious and they're hypervigilant, you can't be clear, you can't think as well, and you're not as productive.
Right. And you're probably not giving good service to the customer.
But you can't. I mean, there's a real connection between how you feel in your body, the control you have over yourself, your ability to focus, and so much of that has to do with how you're feeling. So again, if you're in a stressful environment, and it's a stressful environment because there's nothing but conflict, or all you ever do is hear the negativity, your brain cannot function as well. It is harder to self-regulate your emotions and everything else, which you need to function well.
Right. Well, I think we've all felt that in one thing or another. You're playing pool, right? And you're off, right? And the whole game, you start by doing some really stupid stuff. It just gets worse and worse and worse.
That's right.
And pretty soon you're the worst pool player that ever existed, or whatever it is you're doing.
And then every time you walk into that pool hall, you're so anxious ahead of time, you'll never be able to focus.
Right.
So that's like a business.
Right. And so really, our employees, when we are putting them under stress like that, they can't serve our customers really well or serve the business really well.
And they can't even if they want to.
Even if they want to.
Even if they want to, because their system, their whole body.
Traumatized.
It's traumatized, but also it's in an escalated state. And especially for women, we run cortisol really easily, and our adrenal glands are sort of firing. And it's harder especially for women, to calm your system. And unless your system's calm, you can't think clearly, and you're going to be reactive and you're going to get triggered more. And you don't want that when you're dealing with customers. But you also, there's a finite amount of willpower. People have an erroneous belief that we just have a ton of willpower and nothing affects it. But there's a finite amount of willpower. So you can use your willpower to stay calm, to not be stressed, to really focus, to do a good job, but it will only go so far. So it has to go back to calming your system and how you're feeling about yourself.
And to some extent, as the business owners, that comes down to the environment that we create.
That's right. And really being aware that, are you looking for what the employee is doing right? Or do you only notice and articulate what they're doing wrong? That is a toxic environment, and that doesn't support anyone or the business.